Hello and welcome for the rest of Galari portals. My name is Malon Fleroy, one of the field linguists. We've discovered some new dimensions, and I'll be sharing what we've found there. The first dimension discovered was dimension 961Q. We explored a temperate rainforest area, where the weather was constantly cloudy. The place seemed to be inhabited by various species of intelligent birds. We first came into contact with a group that calls itself Hello and welcome for the rest of Galari portals. You have just been tricked into watching a submission for Agmashwa's cursed conlang, circus number 4. This bird can read the C⁸+F. Common cannot begin to describe the nature of this language, nor can mere uncommon. Even rare is too down to earth for this extraordinary tongue. Nay, it can only be called epic, Avian, or is a language spoken by the Avians, a culture including diverse species of birds. As you should but probably don't know, birds vocalize differently from humans, and this language reflects that fact. The language is in 12/8 time overall and uses measures of 4/3/8 beats each. The score shown lists all possible beats, along with the symbols we assign to each of them. Note that the last 5 beats in the list are distinguished only by which notes are connected by a melisma, so pay attention to these. You might wonder why one of the notes is colored red. This note is pronounced differently from normal. Depending on the bird speaking, this might manifest in timbre, multiple articulation, or literally emitting a red light. Also, beats may be retrograded, or played backwards, to yield a different beat. Obviously, for beats that are their own retrograde, this makes no sense at all and is declared illegal. Avian is in 31 equal divisions of the octave, or 31 Edo. What does that mean? Most of our music divides the octave into 12 equal parts. This is called 12 Edo. Avians divide the octave into 31 equal parts instead. We can use staff notation in this new system perfectly well. Each tone, or whole step, is 5 degrees big. When it comes to semitones, or half steps, there are 2 different intervals. A diatonic semitone, which connects 2 notes with adjacent names, is 3 degrees large, while a chromatic semitone, which connects 2 notes with the same name, is 2 degrees large. This means that enharmonic equivalences are different, so for example, C# and D flat are different notes. Since we have 31 different notes, we now have 31 keys, so some of them have to be written with more than 7 sharps or flats. More precisely, the keys range from C double flat minor, which has 17 flats, to D double sharp minor, which has 13 sharps. Since Avian orthography doesn't use quarter tone accidentals, you might encounter triple flats and more rarely triple sharps in the score. Each measure can start out in any of the 31 keys, but modulating between beats within the same measure is more limited. You can modulate up or down a perfect fifth, major third, or minor third, or modulate up an augmented sixth which approximates the 7:4 frequency ratio, or a doubly augmented third or a doubly diminished fifth which approximates the 11:8 frequency ratio. Of course, any of these might modulate in either direction depending on the particular source and destination keys. Not every beat change needs to have a modulation. In fact, the pattern of presences or absences of modulations after each beat makes up a syllable schema, which indicates what part of speech a word is in. Lastly, for the phonology, the Avians also add ornaments to some of the beats. These are phonologically contrastive. The precise pitches aren't important for ornaments 1 to 6, but for 5 and 6, you don't write any accidentals on the appoggiatura. Ornament 7 is an octave jump, and ornament 8 is similar but the jump is off by a single degree of 31 Edo. You might wonder why the score uses the soprano clef out of all the clefs available. This is because this is the only correct way to write Avian. That is, the birds learned how to write in Western staff notation, but they did it from a copy of the Bach-Gesellschaft Ausgabe accidentally thrown into a portal to dimension 961Q. This means that for your own safety, you must absolutely follow these rules when writing in Avian. You must always use the soprano clef and no other clef. You must always cancel excess accidentals when changing the key signature. And you must never, ever beam notes together unless they're connected by a mousema. For our purposes, we'll mainly be using a romanization scheme, mostly out of compactness concerns. Each syllable is represented by its key, followed by the beats and the modulations between them. Retrograde syllables are written with the following prime symbol, and ornaments are written using superscript numerals. Do not tell the birds about this romanization, and absolutely keep this video from being leaked. We'll move to grammar now. Epic Avian has quite a free word order thanks to its case system and rich agreement. For once, there's something you don't have to worry about. We also point out that there are phrase and sentence terminators in formal language, but we're apparently not allowed to learn what these are. Also, any speech referring to non-avian animals is automatically considered informal, and we don't know why. Some languages allow for hyperbaton, which is when modifiers are separated from heads by other words. Here's an example from Narrathgraph, a language from dimension 99n, where the word for language is declined in the instrumental case in singular number, and the word for difficult is conjugated into a participle whose head is expected to be in the instrumental singular. So these two don't have to be next to each other to make it clear that they are related, and in fact, we have another noun between them in the example. In Epic Avian, this kind of thing is mandatory, for modifiers that agree with their heads in some way, that is. Sometimes, you don't have any spare words to wedge between words that need to be separated, so in this case, you can insert a filler syllable, which can be transposed to any key. In fact, this appears in the name of the language we mentioned earlier because we were saying its name in isolation, so in larger sentences, you won't always hear the filler syllable. We return to schemata. Here are the 8 possible schemata, where the hyphen represents no modulation and the exclamation mark represents a modulation. So, for example, names feature a modulation after the first beat but nowhere else. Nouns, which have the schema bang bang bang, are divided into 3 declension schemes and 4 genders, Zoe, Lamplight, Herman Miller, and Agmashwa. These genders are paired into 2 pairs, Zoe with Agmashwa and Lamplight with Herman Miller. As mentioned earlier, nouns are marked for case, of which there are 19. Each case is assigned a number from -1 to 17. These are the 6 trickiest cases. The conjunct case is used for compound words. The modifying noun is put into this case while the head noun is whatever case it wants to be. It also acts as a way to turn an adjective into an adverb. The other cases cover various thematic roles. Here are some more cases. Of particular note are the 3 genitive cases, depending on the case of the possessum, and the 2 semblative cases that were fished out from dimension 99n about a millennium ago. Here is the declension table for the first declension. For these nouns, you will get 2 stems, one for the even cases and the other for the odd cases. An example of such a noun is, which is a Zoe, noun meaning bird. For the second declension, there are 5 possible final beats. There are 3 stems, with the choice depending on which third the fractional part of the square root of the case number lies in. To read the table, you also have to know about 2 mutations. The retrograde mutation retrogrades the first beat, or cycles between the non-retrogradable beats if this isn't possible. The demodulation mutation transposes the first beat of the syllable to remove the modulation to the second beat. An example of a second declension noun is, which is a Herman Miller noun meaning world or obsolete syllabic character. The third declension, in contrast, changes only the modulations between the beats according to a particular cycle. The table shows how many steps in the cycle to advance for each modulation. The third declension also marks definiteness, indefinite, definite, very definite, or ridiculously definite, and number, non-dual or dual. This declension scheme has 3 stems, labeled X, Y, and 9 in a weird font. Again, we have the retrograde mutation. An example of a third declension noun is this old crap we've seen again, but at least you now know the Y and 9 stems and the fact that it's Herman Miller. Adjectives have the schema bang-bang and agree with their head noun in case, gender, and number. What numbers? It depends on the clarith. Clarith means how actual numbers are split into grammatical numbers. So far, we've only been able to get info on one clarith, the singular one. Here is the declension table for the singular clarith, and I'm saying this to prevent the TTS from losing its mind. In this CCC4, the third beat of the lemma is either or. Whenever there are 3 letters in a cell, they describe the contents of the third beat, depending on the third beat of the lemma. If there's only one, then use that for all nouns. When there is an ornament specified after a slash, add it to the fourth beat replacing any that was already there, of course, since multiple ornaments on a syllable is heresy. When there's a modulation after the slash, replace the modulation between the third and fourth beats with that. If the syllable is retrograde, then change any ornamentation on that syllable to 9 - that. If it isn't, then keep it the same, and if an ornamentation is provided on that syllable, then just use that one. Finally, an asterisk in the cell says to postpone the first modulation to occur after the second beat. Now you understand how to read this table. Go memorize it, because the birds aren't going to tolerate your having this table with filthy romanized letters on hand. Also, let me know if you find additional clarif, or is it clarfes, but it feels so wrong not to say clarfens, right? Verbs. They've got the schema -bang dash, and they conjugate for the number of the subject, its gender relative to itself. Yes, verbs have genders, tense or aspect, mood, and polarity. The modulation and last 2 beats form the stem, while the first 2 beats make up the inflectional prefix. There are 4 principal parts, just as in Latin. Unfortunately, I did not learn Latin, and epic avians are used in different ways. I realize that I probably should have put the stem after the prefix in these tables, but I've been too preoccupied with spying on Likari portals, so this is the best you'll get for today. For the indicative mood, you have a 3-way tense distinction and a 3-way polarity distinction, the one with the question mark being the interrogative. Remember, Zoe is paired with Adam Schwa and Lamplight with Herman Miller. For the subjunctive mood, you only distinguish between positive and negative polarities, and you mark for aspect instead of tense. For the participles, which are apparently considered a mood, you mark for voice instead. In addition to the finite and participle forms, epic avian has verbal nouns, which are used to create content clauses and sometimes act as converbs. Here are some interesting cases to look at. A special case is the copula, which has the schema -bang bang. This has distinct forms for all 4 genders and singular, dual, plural, and generic numbers. For the indicative mood, it distinguishes preterite and imperfect tenses in positive and negative interrogative polarities. For the subjunctive mood, the copula also has the nomic aspect. The participles for the copula are always active, but there's a non-past past tense distinction. Finally, verbal nouns distinguish between indicative and subjunctive moods. The table is too long to fit in this video, so check the grammar. So far, you might be unimpressed by this language. Surely it would be at least uncommon by now, but is it really worth the title of being epic? Is this all these birds have to offer? We have observed that epic avians take about 1.8 seconds per measure. Is this time you, as a hypothetical bird, want to be spending on a single particle? Of course not. If you're going to use 1.8 seconds, then you better get the most out of it. Packed particles let you fit up to 4 particles in a singular measure, 1 in the key, 2 as a beat and the following modulation, and finally, 1 spanning the last 2 beats. For example, the word encodes a reflexive particle for case 1, the passive case, a particle indicating inward motion, a clausulant, and a particle meaning surely. If you have empty space you don't need, then you can fill them with null particles. For instance, only the second part of the word carries information, namely that it's a reflexive possessive determiner for case 1. Dimension 961Q. The Q is the worst tile in Scrabble. But Yuru, the Q is worth 10 points. Fuck you, shut the fuck up, I don't fucking care. I hope you draw all the Q's and V's in Scrabble. The following 2 minutes and 21 seconds will consist of live footage of me playing OMG words. Names, which have the schema bang dash dash, consist of one scrunkly element on beat 1, followed by 3 phonetic elements. The key is chosen according to the theme of the name. The scrunkly element tells you how well the name anagrams in the 2 major word lists used in competitive English language Scrabble, Collins Scrabble Words and NASPA word list. Each name is put into one of 5 tiers for each word list. From is valid in the word list to does not anagram to a valid word regardless of how many letters are added. For the NWL tier, what matters is the tier relative to the CSW tier. Here's a table showing the valid scrunkly parts. For example, Flirwa only anagrams to a valid CSW or NWL word with 2 extra letters, namely poriforel and roviforel, so it has a scrunkly part of irrelevant image. After the scrunkly part is the transposition, which indicates the origin of the name, and then come the phonetic elements. They apparently match the original pronunciation, but we haven't been able to get data on the specific associations. Sometimes, you don't need all 3 slots. In that case, repeat the last element to fill the space. Right, antonyms. I think these complement names to append grammatical info and also include numerals, but we don't have enough data on these words. Nanny.